Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Let me share my screen and we'll get started in a minute. Okay, let's wait maybe 1 minute or two to let everyone join the webinar. Okay, let's get started. So welcome everyone. I'm Romain, co-founder and CEO of DidoMe. We are a company specialized in consent management. And the goal of this webinar is to help you prepare your TCF V2 transition. So the timeline is getting intense. The official live date for V2 is August 15th. So you're probably in the middle of this transition or getting ready to move to TCF V2. So the purpose of this webinar is to really share with you 10 practical steps to get ready in time and to cover everything you need to be confident that when you press the push button and go in production, everything will work smoothly. So I'm today with Lucille. Lucille, do you want to introduce yourself shortly?
Yeah, of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Lucille. I'm Customer Success Manager at DidoMe, and my role is to help clients use and implement our solution, and therefore be compliant also with policies.
Yes, thank you. So today's webinar is based on a TCF V2 readiness checklist that goes into details in these 10 steps, and this checklist is available on our website or directly with our team. So if you want to get more details on these steps, feel free to reach out to us or to go to our website to download it. Without further ado, let's get started. For those who don't know DidoMe, we are specialized in consent and preference management. Our role is to help companies collect consent from their users, store them in a way that is compliant and also useful, which makes sense in terms of your business, and also help you ensure that the consent that you collect is effective, meaning that it is correctly distributed and shared with vendors that are using personal data on your behalf. So that's our only role. We do only consent and preference management at DidoMe. We are really specialists and have built a platform that supports all these consent and preference management needs. We have grown massively over the last 3 years. So currently, DidoMe is deployed on over 90,000 websites and mobile applications. So we are familiar with all these consent and cookie and tracker consent questions, and like today's webinar is here to share our knowledge about what is typically asked from our clients about this topic. Obviously, TCF V2 is a topic that is dear to publishers because a lot of their online monetization depends on their ability to collect cookie consent for advertising, and therefore we'll probably focus a bit the way we present these steps to the publisher issue. That being said, we know a lot of brands actually face the same type of problems and decisions, and so I think these steps are equally relevant for brands. At DidoMe, we work with both brands and publishers, so our solutions can help you really maximize like the consent rates that you have on your websites and within your mobile applications. Let's get started. So first steps are about getting prepared for the August 15th deadline. And to start with, I'll let Lucille quickly recap what is the Transparency and Consent Framework in its version 2 and how this is relevant for you.
Thanks, Romain. So yes, I'm going to start by reminding you very quickly what the IAB TCF is. It is a standard for collecting and transmitting user consent across the digital advertising industry. So it was created in 2018 by the IAB Europe, as well as the IAB Tech Lab, and it has been implemented by all major players in the advertising industry. It eases and standardizes purpose and consent collection between ad tech players, and it creates a common ground.
Thank you.
So the framework has evolved. It's now releasing, so it's version 2. There's several reasons for that. It had to include novelties and also faced criticism, particularly about the fact that the 5 initial purposes were considered as not precise enough. So the goal is to offer more information and choices to end users, as well as give publishers as well. They will be able to say, for example, no to vendors that are using legitimate interest as a legal basis, for example.
Okay, so let's get started. How do I get ready for August 15th to transition to V2? I think the starting point is to really try to understand for your case what TCF V2 means. And so probably try to dig a bit into the details of V2. There are some resources that are really useful to get there. The main one being the TCF V2 policies that are available online on the IAB Europe website. These policies really define like obligations from each TCF stakeholders. Of course, obligations for vendors that they have to respect, obligations for consent management platforms such as DidoMe, and also obligations for website publishers that want to join and participate to the standard. A standard is about a common language that is shared by all stakeholders, and so to really exist, it needs to have some principles. These principles are defined in the policies. The novelties about TCF V2 are that they are like more granular choices offered to end users, more purposes, 10 instead of 5, plus 2 new and special purposes. There is a concept of stacks, so the ability to categorize purposes together and therefore simplify the information of the user on the user interface to ensure that the end user is not overwhelmed by too much information at the same time. There are a number of other new features that are really interesting regarding the right to object to specific vendors, which were not like the case in V1. So you couldn't really oppose to specific vendors. There was no opt-out mechanism embedded into V1. This is now the case in V2. And overall, I think the main benefit of V2 is for publishers, which gain a lot of new control over the data collection and processing that happen on their website, and these controls exist through what the TCF calls publisher restrictions, so the ability to exactly define what a given vendor will be allowed to do for specific purposes on a given website. This is completely new, and we can of course get into more details. But I think that this discovery phase is aimed at really understanding the principles of TCF V2, figuring out what is relevant and what is not relevant for you as a publisher, and try to like really share this knowledge across your organization so that everyone is at the same level of information with respect to TCF. Because the next step is logically to ensure that within your organization, the transition to V2 is a team effort. What is very specific about consent management is that it's not only about the DPO saying to other teams that they need to do something. It's not only about the monetization team to say what needs to happen. It's not about the tech team to say what they can or can't do on a given website. It's about all of them to really coordinate and ensure that what is actually offered to the end user through the CMP correctly reflects your compliance obligation, your monetization needs, and your tech and performance needs. And so we really recommend to figure out which team needs to be gathered and to define this working group within your organization as fast as possible. This is probably the thing you need to focus on right now to ensure everybody is correctly informed and really understands its role within this working group. Because what we see as a CMP is that is where our clients spend more time. So configuring the CMP, deploying the CMP on your website is going to require much less time than this initial organization step. The next step is to so now that you have a team of internal experts that are going to decide over the choices that are yours for the transition to V2, the next step is to have a good understanding of what happens on your website. So for which vendors you need to collect consent, on which websites or online properties, mobile applications you will need to collect consent, and to really map these two aspects so that when you get to your CMP configuration, you have an exact list of vendors. Why are we saying vendors and not purposes? Because within TCF, there is a direct link between vendors and the purposes. So figuring out which vendors are bringing you money, which vendors are really needed for your website to operate, is the starting point to your CMP configuration, and that's where you should spend some time to really establish this list of vendors. The good point about TCF is that you are in control. So you're not forced to collect consent for each and every vendor out there that exists globally in the ad tech ecosystem, and God knows how many there are. You really have control over that list. So you can take any subset of this vendor list that exists within the TCF and decide that you will collect consent only for this amount of vendors. Really, this is the first piece of control that is yours as a publisher, and you should really use it as much as possible. So if you're late in the transition, that's probably not your core focus. We invite you to get ready and then reduce the list. But if you have time, or if you really have time to and you understand which vendors are really relevant for you, you should restrict access and to your website. So you should leverage that control that is offered to you through the TCF. The fourth step is to combine this initial analysis about which vendors are relevant, which websites will need to use a TCF V2 CMP, and to combine that with your own legal obligations, because as a publisher you also have purposes for which you want to collect consent for yourself, and really understand your internal legal needs and combine them with your analysis about external vendors. So that's where your DPO, your legal counsel can really help and should be brought to the table, if not much early, if possible. But that's really, I think, the next logical step. So to validate with a legal eye what you the initial choices that you perform. So this first phase is really dedicated at understanding correctly the TCF, understanding who are the internal stakeholders that needs to be involved, figuring out through an audit which vendors and which websites, mobile applications are concerned with the transition, and validate that with your legal counsel or your DPO. The next phase is about your CMP, so the consent management platform that will help you actually collect and perform the consent collection on your websites or your mobile applications. And this is also something where you should like make careful choices. So because like not every CMPs are equivalent, and I'm not saying that because I run a CMP, but really because it's how the TCF has been structured. So to really be in a position to collect TCF V2 consent, you need to be registered within the IAB Europe TCF framework. So as a CMP, you need to be listed there. And also what is probably equally fundamental, you need to pass the TCF V2 compliance checks. So the TCF organization has a team that performs compliance checks to CMPs to ensure that the version that CMPs roll out on the market are valid and respect the TCF V2 principles. So there is actually a list that exists on the IAB Europe website where you can see which CMPs are actually validated. And that's where you should like start if you consider buying a third-party CMP like DidoMe. You could also decide to build your own CMP. That's probably like not what I would recommend right now if you're just getting started, because it clearly takes a lot of time and resources, but that's also an option that is offered to you. And the framework is open, the TCF framework is open, so you can really like build your own if you'd like. And the last choice is clearly to like check with your existing CMP if they are ready to help you migrate to TCF V2. I've spent a bit of time there because there are also some confusions about what is a CMP and what it is not. I think within the TCF, the Transparency and Consent Framework, it's very clear what is a CMP, and therefore, like if you want security, you need to ensure you have the right one. Next phase is about configuring the CMP that you've chosen. And Lucille, I'll let you present that.
Thanks, Romain. So yes, the next phase is about configuring your CMP. Step 6, then for us, the CMP you use should cover the basics and policies of version 2 of the TCF. So, for example, your texts need to include some legal text requirements, such as mentioning legitimate interests if you and/or your partners are using it as a legal basis, or the presence of a link in the first layer of the CMP that redirects you to the list of vendors that are dropping cookies on your website. Another thing is calls to action must be of equal prominence. So you cannot have a very small button where it's written learn more and a very big button just next to it where it's written agree and close. This is not accepted by the TCF. DidoMe, for example, offers you texts per default in the console that are compliant with V2 policies and that you can use. You also have customization needs that you can meet in the console directly also. For instance, if you wish to apply your branding to your CMP, it is possible, as you can input, for example, your logo or choose your font and your color scheme, etc. Next step, so for us, it's going to be step 7, is about managing your vendors. First, you need to identify and select them. DidoMe has a feature that allows you to choose the whole list of IAB vendors at once, but you can also make a more granular choice if you wish. they will automatically be linked to purposes that they have already chosen. You can also implement restrictions, such as forbidding one or more vendor to use a specific purpose. And as a publisher, you have more control over your vendors. You will be able to refuse that a vendor uses legitimate interest, for example. Next phase is testing and deploying your CMP, finally. So before going live, we strongly advise you to test that vendors do actually receive the V2 consent string. First, you need to update your embed code and check if you're using the ID of purposes to create triggering rules. Indeed, even if IDs for vendors do not change, IDs for purposes do. So just think of checking if you were using purposes for triggering rules. Thanks, Romain. And as Romain said a bit earlier, actually, you must review your configuration with your legal team. A great example is, for example, to validate your texts with them. And final step is going live. So these are a few questions and answers that we often get about the transition to V2. Once in V2, stay in V2. There's no turning back to V1. There will also be a complete recollection of user consents, as V1 purposes are completely different than V2 ones. So you need to recollect consents to be able to use them. Also, making a parallel in the same environment between V1 and V2 is strongly advised against. And finally, do not hesitate to take advantage of publisher restrictions.
Yes, thank you, Lucille. So these were the 10 steps we suggest you to follow to get ready in due time. Of course, it was more focused on a practical checklist. There are a lot more resources that we make available to you on our resource page. So focusing more on the TCF V2 exact specifications and history as well. In any case, as I said, we all these steps are available in our TCF V2 readiness checklist that you can reach out to us to get. Yeah, feel free also to navigate to our website to check more resources on this topic. All the team is also available anytime. Whether you are an existing DidoMe client, feel free to reach out to Charlotte, Lucille, or Damien with your questions about your V2 transition. If you're not a DidoMe client, Nesty will be happy to discuss your needs for your V2 transition and help you figure out how to solve them. I'm going to pause now and maybe take some questions. If there are some, let me just pull the questions. Okay. Feel free to read, to ask some questions if you have some. We typically have questions on Google. Google is a very critical point about V2 transition. Google is joining the TCF in its version 2. And therefore, a lot of publishers work with Google and depend on Google for their monetization. So Of course, it's an important aspect of V2 transition. So Google has declared publicly that they would be ready for August 15th, and that they recommend to transition as soon as they are joining the global vendor list. The exact date at which Google will join is not known yet, but it's likely to be early August. So if our recommendation is to really move to production between in the 2 first weeks of August, to really recollect consent with the global vendor list that includes Google, to avoid having to do so later in the month. If most of your revenue depend on Google, you shouldn't migrate to V2 until Google has joined. Otherwise, you'll have to recollect consent when Google does so. Which is obviously not the best idea for your users, and will not help with consent fatigue. So our recommendation is to move to V2 once and for good, as soon as all your main vendors have joined the global vendor list, including Google. Any other questions that you have about your V2 transition, or about another topic? Actually, very often people also ask us about how you combine TCF V2 principles with other form of legal obligations, and that's also something which is moving ground, because in France, for instance, the CNIL is establishing new principles about cookie consent, and should do so during the fall. Okay, so if there are no more questions, again, thank you for your time today. Feel free to reach out to us to get access to the TCF V2 readiness checklist, or just to confront your questions with our experts. I was happy to present you this webinar today with Lucille, and have a good evening or good day. Thank you.
Thank you for attending.